Imagine walking through the narrow streets of the most romantic city on this planet, where every corner whispers a story of ancient glory and timeless beauty. But look closely at the ground beneath your feet, where marble bricks that stood for 1,000 years are now being devoured by the relentless salt. In the year 2019, a record flood reached 187 centimeters, a devastating surge that submerged 80% of this historic floating masterpiece. The Italian government, desperate to save their crown jewel, spent over $6 billion on a massive engineering project known as the MOSE to stop the sea. However, here is the terrifying truth that officials rarely mention. Even if this massive system works perfectly, the city of Venice is still slowly sinking into oblivion. This is not just a fight against rising tides, but a losing battle against a foundation that was never meant to hold the weight of modern ambition. Salt water is not just touching these buildings. It is climbing through the walls, crystallizing inside the stones, and exploding them from the inside out like a silent bomb. Millions of tourists flock here every year, unaware that they are walking through a dying museum that might vanish before the end of this current century. To understand why $6 billion cannot stop the inevitable, we must look down into the mud, where a 1,000-year-old secret is finally reaching its limit. Is Venice a living city, or just a very expensive ornament waiting for its final breath before the Adriatic Sea decides to reclaim its long-lost territory? Stay with us as we uncover the structural flaws, the political scandals, and the geological nightmare that prove Venice is running out of time much faster than expected. We will explore the shocking reality behind the wooden foundations that have supported this heavy empire of stone and marble for over 10 centuries of human history. To understand the coming disaster, we must travel back 1,000 years to when Venice was nothing more than a group of swampy, unstable islands. Fleeing from barbarian invasions, the early settlers made a desperate choice to build their homes on the soft and shifting mud of the vast lagoon. They drove 10 million wooden piles deep into the thick clay, creating a massive artificial forest hidden forever beneath the surface of the dark emerald water. These logs were brought from the ancient forests of Slovenia and Croatia, carried by heavy ships to support the weight of a rising maritime empire. You might ask how wood can survive underwater for 10 centuries without rotting away into nothingness or being destroyed by hungry and tiny marine parasites. The secret lies in the thick, oxygen-free mud of the lagoon, which prevents bacteria from breaking down the organic fibers of the submerged timber logs. Over hundreds of years, these piles have effectively petrified, turning into a substance as hard as stone through a continuous process of absorbing mineral-rich sediments. However, the Venice we see today is vastly different from the humble wooden fishing village that first emerged from the salty marshes many centuries ago. As the Republic grew wealthy, they replaced light timber structures with heavy Istrian stone and massive slabs of precious marble brought from very distant lands. They transformed a floating village into a heavy stone museum, placing an impossible burden on the ancient wooden pillars that were never meant for this weight. Every palace and every church adds thousands of tons of pressure, forcing the wooden piles to compress the soft soil beneath them even further down. This geological phenomenon is known as subsidence, where the city is literally pushing itself down into the earth through its own magnificent and heavy weight. Data shows that the city has settled about 25 centimeters over the last 100 years, a distance that makes every high tide a deadly threat. The soil beneath the city, a layer of clay called caranto, is being squeezed like a wet sponge under the feet of millions of tourists each year. This creates a tragic paradox, where the very beauty that defines Venice is the primary reason it is sinking into the dark Adriatic waves. We are witnessing a slow-motion collision between human vanity and the laws of physics, as the ancient forest beneath the city finally begins to fail. Architects from the past could never have imagined the sheer scale of the modern world or the massive pressure of today's concrete additions. The foundation is tired, the soil is exhausted, and the sea is rising to meet a city that is moving in the wrong direction. While the wood remains strong against rot, it cannot stop the ground from giving way under the relentless gravity of thousands of heavy stone buildings. This is the grand illusion of Venice, a city that looks immortal but is built on the most fragile and shifting foundation imaginable. To shield Venice from the rising tides, Italy launched the Modulo Sperimentale Elettromeccanico, a massive engineering project more commonly known by its biblical acronym, the MOSE system. This ambitious shield consists of 78 massive steel gates, each weighing nearly 300 tons, anchored deep into the concrete floor of the three narrow lagoon inlets. The design is remarkably clever, using compressed air to empty the hollow gates of water, causing them to float upward and block the sea during dangerous storm surges. Construction began in the year 2003, with the optimistic promise that the entire system would be fully operational within only 8 years of hard labor. However, the project quickly turned into a financial black hole, stretching over 17 long years and costing more than 3 times the original estimated budget of $2 billion. By the time the total bill reached $6 billion, the world realized that the delays were not caused by technical challenges, but by a massive web of corruption. In the year 2014, a shocking scandal erupted when the mayor of Venice and 35 other high-ranking officials were arrested for embezzling vast amounts of public funds. It was revealed that nearly $1 billion, intended for high-quality materials and maintenance, had vanished into the secret offshore bank accounts of corrupt politicians and construction companies. Because of this greed, the steel used for the barriers was not of the superior grade required to withstand the corrosive environment of the salty Adriatic Sea floor. When engineers finally conducted underwater inspections, they were horrified to find that the hinges of the gates were already rotting even before the project was officially finished. Thousands of kilograms of thick mud and aggressive sea barnacles had attached themselves to the sensitive mechanical joints, making it nearly impossible for the gates to move smoothly. The cost of simply cleaning and maintaining these barriers is now estimated to be over $100 million every single year, a burden the city cannot afford. But the technical failure of MOSE goes even deeper than simple rust and corruption, as it fails to address the fundamental geological problem of the entire region. While the steel gates can stop a temporary surge of water, they are completely powerless against the fact that Venice is physically sinking into the Earth's crust. Scientific data confirms that the city is suffering from a double threat. The sea is rising from above, and the land is falling from below at the same time. Venice is losing about 2 millimeters of elevation every year due to natural geological subsidence and the shifting of the massive tectonic plates beneath the Italian peninsula. In the past, humans made the situation worse by pumping massive amounts of fresh groundwater from beneath the city for industrial use, causing the soil to collapse inward. Although the pumping of groundwater has stopped, the irreversible damage to the subterranean clay layers continues to pull the city down toward a watery and dark grave. The MOSE gates were designed based on sea level predictions from the late 20th century, which are now proven to be far too optimistic for our current climate crisis. With every millimeter the city sinks, the frequency of dangerous high tides increases, forcing the authorities to raise the rusty steel gates more often than ever imagined. Experts warn that if the gates must be raised too frequently, it will trigger a biological disaster that could be even worse than the flooding of the city streets. The $6 billion shield is essentially a leaky umbrella that cannot stop the rain from coming up through the floorboards of this ancient and magnificent stone empire. We are seeing the limits of human engineering when it is forced to fight against the combined power of planetary shifts and the consequences of political corruption. As the salt continues to eat away at the low-grade steel, the clock continues to tick for a city that spent its fortune on a flawed and dying solution. As we look toward the end of this current century, the latest scientific data paints a terrifying picture of the accelerating rise of our vast and powerful global oceans. Climate experts from the International Panel predict that the water levels around the lagoon will rise between 30 and 150 centimeters by the year 2100. This massive surge is not just a seasonal threat anymore, but a permanent change that will force the rusty gates of the MOSE system to remain closed almost every day. If the sea rises by 50 centimeters, the barriers would have to be raised between 300 and 400 times every single year to keep the city streets dry. This constant state of isolation creates a deadly ecological trap, turning the historic lagoon from a living, breathing waterway into a stagnant and toxic pool of filthy and dark water. You must understand that Venice is one of the few major cities in the developed world that still does not possess a modern and centralized underground sewage treatment system. For over 1,000 years, the city has relied on the natural rhythm of the tides to flush human waste and household trash out into the deep Adriatic Sea. Every time the MOSE gates rise to block the waves, they also block the exit for millions of liters of untreated waste that flow directly from the ancient stone buildings. Within just a few days of closure, the nitrogen levels in the water spike dangerously high, feeding massive blooms of toxic green algae that consume all available oxygen. The iconic canals that once reflected the glory of the Renaissance would transform into an open sewer, releasing a thick and unbearable smell that no tourist would ever visit. Without the natural circulation of fresh salt water from the open ocean, the delicate ecosystem of the salt marshes would die, leading to a complete collapse of local marine life. This creates an impossible choice for the local government. Do they flood the city with salt water, or do they drown the residents in their own domestic and industrial waste? In the summer months, the intense heat would bake this stagnant mixture, creating a massive health crisis and a breeding ground for dangerous bacteria that could trigger ancient plagues. Historical records show that Venice has survived many invasions, but it has never faced a threat where its own survival depends on turning itself into a giant biohazard. Even the stone walls would suffer further damage as the concentrated chemicals and waste products would accelerate the chemical erosion of the porous marble and ancient brick foundations. We are essentially building a wall to keep the monster out, but we are also trapping the poison inside with us, making the city uninhabitable for any human being. The delicate balance that allowed this miracle of architecture to exist for 10 centuries is being shredded by the rapid escalation of global temperatures and rising sea levels. By the middle of this century, the frequency of these closures will likely destroy the local fishing industry, which has supported thousands of Venetian families for many generations past. What was once a vibrant maritime republic is now a beautiful patient on life support, where every breath is becoming more difficult, and every solution is creating new problems. The sea will not wait for more studies or more funding, as it continues to climb the walls of every church and every home in this sinking garden of stone. As the water gets higher and the air gets more toxic, the dream of saving Venice is slowly being replaced by the cold reality of a permanent environmental evacuation plan. Look at the empty streets where the echoes of footsteps tell a tragic story of a city that is slowly losing its soul and its native people forever. Today, fewer than 50,000 real residents remain in Venice, a staggering drop from the 175,000 people who lived here 70 years ago. Every single day, an average of 2 or 3 locals pack their bags and flee from the rising dampness, the high prices, and the overwhelming flood of tourists. What remains is a beautiful shell, a hollow museum where the lights are turning off in the upper floors of palaces that once ruled the entire Mediterranean world. Beyond the visible water, a silent killer named Salt is performing a microscopic demolition of every marble pillar and ancient brick foundation within this sinking urban garden. When salt water soaks into porous stone and eventually evaporates, the remaining salt crystals expand with incredible force, literally exploding the structural integrity of the buildings from within. This is why the lower parts of every Venetian wall look like they are rotting away, as the stone turns into white powder and falls into the dark canals. We could spend 10 billion or even 20 billion more dollars on massive steel gates, but we cannot stop the massive Adriatic Sea from claiming what is hers. Nature has a very long memory, and the lagoon was never meant to be a permanent stone fortress, but a shifting boundary between the land and the sea. Venice is now facing a profound identity crisis. Is it still a living, breathing human city, or just a very expensive ornament waiting for its final breath? Would you dare to invest your life savings and buy a historic home in a place that might only be accessible by a small submarine in 20 years? The clock is ticking toward a silent midnight for the most romantic place on Earth, and no amount of gold or steel can stop the rising tide. Please share your thoughts in the comments below about whether we should continue to fight this impossible battle or finally let the waves take the city back. Thank you for watching this deep dive into the engineering nightmare of Venice, and do not forget to subscribe for more shocking data about our fragile world.